paper was mainly looking at multidimensionality and dynamics of poverty in Indonesia using an international family life survey, which is called IFLS, from 1993 to 2007. For Indonesia being a country, a developing country, that has had such a progress in terms of reducing income poverty, but also making progress in social indicators, we were hoping to see what had happened to these households in terms of their status across time. We were hoping to see if these households have really improved their conditions in terms of chronicity, which is a repeated status of poverty over time. But what we have found is really interesting, because we see that when we compare the information that we have for Indonesia across time for different households, then there is a dimension that explains most of this status of poverty, which is basically health. Health measured as acute morbidity illnesses and also as mobility issues. But when we take into account the panel, which is following the household across time, then we see that the indicator that contributes the most is then housing. So there are two different conclusions, very important for policy implications, which of course, correspond to an academic paper. There's still much work to be done, but that come out interestingly from the application of a methodology that looks at poverty in a dynamic context, but also in a multidimensional sense. Well, the explanation we found for now is that the conditions of those households that we have been following across time in a panel sense have deteriorated, perhaps in terms of housing. But when we look at those households in separate time periods, we see that their situation is perhaps different. They are more concerned with the health status. That's why we see that more, that contribution, which is higher. But there's still much work to be done on that. I think that once we have explored a bit more, first of all, the dimensions that need to be studied, because for now we have picked 12 different indicators for 5 dimensions. Once we have looked at the literature on that, we hope that this academic paper will provide more insights to the policymakers in Indonesia and look at these dimensions that seem to be those that contribute more to a status that's repetitive poverty over time, in this case, housing conditions. I think the timing of the workshop is a very good one. We are in a moment where the discussion on poverty measurement is focused, yes, on a multidimensional sense, as has been published by the UNDP since 2010. But we are also in a moment where income poverty is still one of the measures that's highly used for measuring poverty across different countries across the world. So the question that comes out to us, and that was the purpose of the workshop, is to see the mismatches between those that are identified as income poor and those that are identified as multidimensionally poor. Are these two groups of people the same? What we have seen here, this workshop, this 2-day workshop, are the mismatches between the two identification criteria. But we have also seen that people in the wealthiest quintiles of income are still multidimensionally poor. And the indicators that contribute to that differ across countries. In the case of Indonesia, it was basically housing again. We have raised interest across different country studies of these mismatches between income poverty and multidimensional poverty. But we have also, I think, contributed to the debate on the importance of the joint distribution, which is often something that's discussed in the policy arena, whether one domain of analysis is enough, whether we need to look at health, education, or even living standards in a separate manner, something called as a dashboard approach. So I feel that the workshop has contributed in these two directions. First, in the mismatches between income and multidimensional poverty measurement, but also in terms of the analysis of the joint and the marginal distributions, which is basically looking at one distribution at a time. We have also been, related with people. We had the presence of important professors from the University of Oxford, like Tony Atkinson or Francis Stewart. We have also had professors coming from the US, like James Foster, who has contributed a lot to this literature. So in a personal standpoint, as a researcher myself, I think I've been really been positive in that, in meeting new people. The main, I would say, output of this workshop for policy decisions is basically that income is not enough. Of course, policies shall focus on one aspect, but we are clearly seeing here that if we only look at poverty measured by income, then we are mismatching and we are overlooking in big enough, groups enough of people in the society. So that would be the first message. And the second message requires also a sound methodological analysis when it comes to poverty measurement. I mean, the numbers are just numbers that come, but require sound methodologies. So the Alcar and Foster method that has been, the main methodological tool over these 2 days has been shown its applicability in the empirical side. From the academic perspective, we feel that we still need to explore some elements. There have been huge discussions from the discussants, but also from all people that have attended on the improvements for each country study. But from the policy side, I think there's still much discussion that needs to be taken care of in each country on the measurement, specifically on the dimensions that are relevant for each country. There was a comment from Francis Stewart at the end who said that it was very important still now to decide how to choose the dimensions, because we have applied a sort of international measurement paper, but the decision of the dimensions is crucial for the analysis of each country. I think that using income as a measure has been something that's easier to be used as a tool. So that's why policymakers are kind of reluctant to change to something that perhaps requires more data gathering, but also that in a certain way won't give the same simplicity in terms of policy decisions. But when I say simplicity, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily been the truth. So it's very simple to manipulate, very simple to use, but still requires, I think, to be complemented by information on other domains. Many of the country studies that have been presented here have been presented by people from the country itself, so people that know the reality, that know what's happening in each country, and that I hope after this workshop will take into account the discussions and the comments, but also the whole, I would say, environment that we had here in terms of academia sharing for the decisions that could be taken forward in terms of policy.